I wouldn't say waved off. I'm not in a rush to do it because I think that Iran has a chance to have a great country and to live happily without death. And I'd like to see that. That's my first option. If there's a second option, I think it would be very bad for Iran. And I think Iran is wanting to talk. I hope they're wanting to talk. It's going to be very good for them if they do.
Because Israel playing a huge role, and they've already shown how much damage they can do to Iran. Next round of talks between the U.S. and Iran are tomorrow in Rome. As President Trump says, he is in no rush to attack the country. He wants to first see if they can make some goals when it comes to peace talks. So here are the stakes. What can they say they share their interests? Both want to avoid war, I guess. No regime change. We don't want to change regimes. They're not looking to overthrow the Ayatollah unless the people rise up and do that. Possible economic cooperation. I don't see that happening, but who knows? Preference for diplomacy. On the other side of cooperation is additional sanctions and going after third-party sanctions like China, who buys 90% of Iran's oil. These are some of the nuclear sites. This is the one experts say is where they really got to focus on, and it might be the hardest of hard targets. How close is Iran to getting a nuclear weapon? They need 7 days to get one. Look what they can get in a month. Look at 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. There is the utter definition of urgency right now to act, and something's got to come out of this. Is there an urgency on Iranian side? Here to discuss this is retired four-star general, Fox News senior strategic analyst, chairman for the Institute of Study War, General Jack Keane. General, you didn't like the tone of the first round of talks in Oman between the U.S. and Iran. Why?
Well, because the President of the United States is unequivocal in what he's saying. Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. And he's issued them an ultimatum. And that ultimatum is pretty simple. Voluntarily dismantle your nuclear enterprise completely. And that means give up the enriched uranium, destroy the facilities that make the advanced centrifuges that enable that enriched uranium, destroy the ballistic missiles that would deliver the weapon systems, open Iran to anywhere, anytime inspections, and do it all by a date certain. So what we should be discussing with the Iranians is now not how much enriched uranium they're going to have, because you cannot permit Iran to have any enriched uranium whatsoever, or the capability with advanced centrifuges to make enriched uranium. Why is that? Because in the 10 years since the Obama deal was cut, which permitted 3.7% enriched uranium. Sorry to get into those kind of details, but it's important because the Iranians today, in a matter of weeks, because they have advanced centrifuges, can take that minimum amount of enriched uranium and build it to weapons grade. So that's the issue here. And while the United States wants peace and stability in the region, we've got to recognize Israel's position here. They look at Iran having a nuclear weapon as an existential threat to their country. And that's the reality of it, and we've got to be able to support them. Also, if Iran got a nuclear weapon, Brian, and this is why the president is adamant about this, what will happen in the region? There will be a nuclear arms race in the region. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, other countries will all get nuclear weapons. And the danger of that is, given the volatility of the Middle East, we could see for the first time in history an exchange of nuclear weapons.
No question.
Because of that volatility and that destability.
So we know,
the stakes are very high here.
I know, and it's got to be zero, and I hope that Steve Woodcup understands that. I know Marco Rubio understands that, and we know that the Russians, we had the Iranian, for the second week in a row, go meet with Russian delegation, including Lavrov, who says, I'll help you do this. Real quick, on the plan that was in the New York Times a couple of days ago, the president said he wasn't for it. He didn't deny that the plan was accurate. Did you, from what you know of the war plan to take out their nuclear weapons, we have to play a role. The Israelis don't have the right bombs yet to do it. Do you think the president didn't like the plan, or he doesn't like the idea of the attack?
Well, I don't know those details, and I don't ask for those details because that's classified. But here's what I do know. The Israelis, if they had to, would do this alone. They don't want to do that because they want to be supported by the United States. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump are really on the same page in dealing with Iran. The president wants to see if Iran will voluntarily do this. If not, he would likely support with U.S. capability an Israeli-led attack and give Israel the bombers that are necessary to help destroy these targets.
Right.
Yes, so that would likely be a joint operation.
So let's talk about Ukraine and the peace talks that seem to be going nowhere. Here's Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Listen.
The United States has been helping Ukraine over the last 3 years, and we want it to end. But it's not our war. I want everyone to understand that. And the reason why I make that point is the president has spent 87 days at the highest level of his government repeatedly taking efforts to bring this war to an end. We are now reaching a point where we need to decide and determine whether this is even possible or not, which is why we're engaging both sides. So we need to determine very quickly now, and I'm talking about in a matter of days, whether or not this is doable over the next few weeks. If it is, we're in. If it's not, then we have other priorities to focus on.
Right, and Ukraine, and by the way, the rare earth deal is going to be formalized this week with the U.S. and Ukraine. What is Rubio doing there? What's his tactic?
He's talking to Russia. I mean, the reality is what we're seeing here, the president wants peace. President Zelensky of Ukraine wants peace. The Ukrainian people want peace. There's one player here who doesn't want it, and that's Putin. And he's been stiffing us for weeks. The secretary knows that, Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, knows it, the negotiators know it, and the president of the United States know it. And this is the Russian playbook. Delay, 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 stall, get concessions. They want Ukraine to be in a more vulnerable position. Putin has not given up his aspirations to topple the government in Ukraine and put a stooge in. That's kind of where he is. And if that is his position and the United States comes to that and they're not going to make a deal, then we got to take the next option, which is what? Which is slap some real sanctions on Putin once and for all and shut down China and buying oil from them, and also go after the central banking systems, and then upgun Ukraine in terms of military capabilities, something Putin will really pay attention to. And that's kind of, I think we're at that crossroads now. That's what Secretary Rubio is telling us.
I hear you. And by the way, the Russians had conducted roughly a battalion-sized mechanized assault yesterday, and it was repelled by the Ukrainians. So we'll see what happens. Let them buy weapons and let them fight. They're better fighters. Thanks so much, General. Have a great weekend.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.